Why did people in the Soviet Union hang carpets on their walls? Today, that question often sounds like the beginning of a joke. After all, a carpet belongs on the floor, doesn't it? So why would several generations of people hang one above the sofa, treat it as a centerpiece, and even take pride in it? But if you look at the Soviet wall carpet not as a meme, but as an object of its time, it starts to make a lot more sense. It was not just a strange design choice. It was a response to the way people lived, to small apartments, to cold concrete walls, to thin partitions and noisy neighbors, to the shortage of beautiful household goods, and, most importantly, to the very human desire to turn a standard apartment into a real home. That's why the carpet became one of the most recognizable details of Soviet everyday life. Look through old family photographs from the Soviet era, and you will see it again and again. A child in a school uniform holding flowers on the first day of school, newlyweds after the registry office, relatives gathered around a holiday table, guests sitting on the sofa, New Year's Eve, a birthday, a graduation, and somewhere in the background, almost always, there is a large patterned carpet. It might be deep red, burgundy, brown, gold, sometimes green or blue. It might have a large medallion in the center, floral patterns, geometric borders, and dense ornaments that a child could stare at for hours. Finding roads, islands, secret signs, or imaginary creatures inside the pattern. For adults, it was a serious purchase. For children, it was part of the room, almost a small world of its own. For guests, it was a sign that the apartment was settled, cared for, and respectable. And for the era itself, it became one of the easiest ways to recognize a Soviet home at a glance. But the story of the carpet began long before Soviet apartments. Carpet weaving had existed for centuries in Central Asia, the Caucasus, Iran, Turkey, and many other regions. In those cultures, a carpet was never just decoration. It was craft, memory, tradition, and sometimes even a kind of visual language. The patterns were not random. They could refer to the sun, water, the road, fertility, protection, home, and life itself. A diamond shape could be connected with fertility or protection. A wavy line could suggest water or a path. Plant motifs could symbolize growth and abundance. Even if an average Soviet buyer did not know the exact meaning of every symbol, the carpet still carried a sense of depth. It looked rich, warm, traditional, and solid. In the Soviet Union, this old craft met mass production. That is what makes the Soviet carpet so interesting. It belongs to two worlds at once. On one side, there were traditional patterns, regional styles, hand weaving, and the cultural heritage of Central Asia and the Caucasus. On the other side, there were factories, standards, production plans, synthetic fibers, and machine-made goods intended for millions of ordinary families. The carpet was no longer only a unique handmade object. It also became a mass-produced household item. But this did not mean it had no artistic value. Soviet carpet making also produced genuine works of decorative art. Some carpets were designed not just with traditional ornaments, but with Soviet themes: industry, construction, agriculture, labor, space exploration, and the idea of a new modern life. There were carpets with titles such as Oil, The Horse Ride, Irtish, and Moscow is Being Built. These were not just home decorations. They were attempts to weave the Soviet worldview into an ancient textile form. A carpet could show factories, rivers, cities, cranes, workers, or symbols of progress. So the Soviet carpet was not only a grandmother's wall decoration, it was part of a much larger story. The story of how folk tradition, state ideology, industrial production, and everyday life all crossed paths in one object. Of course, most families did not have museum-quality carpets at home. They had more ordinary ones, patterned, factory-made, dense, sometimes wool, sometimes mixed fiber, sometimes synthetic. But it was exactly this ordinary carpet that became the true hero of the Soviet apartment. To understand why it mattered so much, you have to look at Soviet housing. In the mid-1950s, Soviet architecture changed dramatically. The grand decorative style of the Stalin era, with its high ceilings, ornamented facades, and monumental ambitions, gave way to a new priority: build faster, cheaper, and in much greater numbers. In 1955, the Soviet government issued a decree against architectural excesses. In practice, that meant less decoration, less prestige, and more standardization. 2 years later, in 1957, another major decision pushed mass housing construction even further. The country needed millions of apartments. Many people were still living in communal flats, barracks, dormitories, basements, or overcrowded temporary housing. The solution was mass construction, standardized apartment blocks, panel buildings, and the famous 5-story buildings often called Khrushchevkas. For millions of families, getting a separate apartment was a huge step forward. A private kitchen, a private bathroom, a front door you could close. After years in shared living spaces, this could feel like the beginning of a new life. But that new life came with compromises. The apartments were small, the ceilings were low, the walls were thin, the rooms were narrow, the layouts were repetitive. Entire neighborhoods could look almost identical. And inside, the furniture was often similar too. The same wall units, similar sofas, similar lamps, similar wallpaper. People finally had their own space, but now they had to make that space feel personal. This is where the carpet came in. It solved several problems at once. First, it decorated the room. A bare wall in a small apartment could look cold and unfinished. Wallpaper was not always beautiful, and attractive wallpaper could be hard to find. But a large carpet instantly changed the room. It added color, texture, warmth, and a sense of completion. The wall behind the sofa was no longer just a wall. It became the visual center of the room. Second, it helped with warmth. This was especially important if a bed or sofa stood against an outside wall. In some apartments, the wall could feel cold in winter. A carpet created an extra layer between the person and the concrete. It did not solve the problem completely, but it made the room feel more comfortable. Third, it softened the sound. In many Soviet apartment blocks, you could hear the neighbors very clearly. A television behind the wall, a conversation, a chair scraping the floor, music, arguments, children crying, celebrations. The carpet didn't turn the apartment into a soundproof room, but it absorbed some of the noise and made the space feel less harsh. And fourth, the carpet was a status symbol. That part is essential. Today, if you want a carpet, you can simply order one online. In the Soviet Union, buying a good household item was not always just a matter of money. You often had to find it, wait for it, know where to get it, or have the right connections. A good carpet was an expensive and serious purchase. It was not something people bought casually. It was discussed, planned, measured, compared. What size should it be? Would it match the sofa? Was the color too dark? Was the pattern too loud? Should it go on the wall or on the floor? When a new carpet finally appeared in the apartment, it was an event. The family would unroll it, inspect it, touch the pile, look at the pattern, and decide where it should go. If it was going on the wall, it had to be hung carefully and evenly. One person would hold it, another would step back and look. Someone else would say, a little higher, or move it to the left. It was not just decorating, it was a small domestic ceremony. A new carpet said something about the family. It suggested stability, care, and a certain level of prosperity. It showed that the home was being arranged properly, that people were trying to live well. The Soviet interior often worked this way. Objects were not only functional, they also showed that a family had achieved a respectable standard of life. Crystal glasses stood behind glass cabinet doors, even if they were used only a few times a year. A dinner set was saved for guests. Books filled shelves. A wall unit displayed what the family was proud of. And the carpet, hanging behind the sofa, gave the room its sense of status every single day. It was not luxury in the Western sense. It was domestic respectability. In many Soviet homes, the carpet became the main visual object in the room. Not a painting, not a poster, not even family portraits. The carpet was larger than all of them. It filled the wall, set the color palette, and appeared in almost every photograph. Family rituals happened in front of it. Children were photographed against it in their school uniforms. Guests sat under it. Newlyweds stood before it because it was the most elegant background in the apartment. Holiday tables were placed nearby. People watched television in front of it. Children played at its edge. For a child, the carpet could feel almost magical. Adults saw ornament. A child saw a map. The central medallion could become a lake or a palace. The border could become a road. Repeating shapes could turn into houses, trees, animals, or secret codes. Children could lie on the floor and stare into the pattern, inventing stories from shapes that were never meant to be stories. That is one of the most human parts of this object. The carpet was not only an adult symbol of status and order, it was also part of childhood imagination. But a carpet also required work. Soviet carpets were heavy. They collected dust. They had to be vacuumed, aired out, cleaned, and beaten. In winter, families often carried them outside and cleaned them in the snow. The carpet would be laid down, covered with fresh snow, brushed, turned over, beaten with a carpet beater, and then carried back inside. Many people still remember that smell: cold air, snow, wool, dust, and the feeling of a deep seasonal cleaning. In Soviet courtyards, metal frames for beating carpets were a normal part of the landscape. Today, they can feel like a disappearing detail of urban life. But back then, they were as ordinary as benches, sandboxes, and clotheslines. On weekends, especially before holidays, you could hear the sharp rhythm of carpet beaters echoing between apartment blocks. This was not just cleaning. It was part of domestic culture. A carpet was cared for because it had value. It was not thrown away because of one stain or a worn edge. It was cleaned, turned, moved to another room, taken to the dacha, passed on to relatives. It could survive several renovations, several apartments, and more than one generation. And this tells us something important about Soviet life. People had a very different relationship with things. Today, many household items are bought quickly and replaced quickly. In the Soviet world, a good thing was expected to last. You found it, you saved for it, you took care of it, you repaired it if possible, and you kept using it. A carpet was not a temporary design choice. It was almost family property. It might begin in the main room, then move to the bedroom, then to the children's room, and eventually to the country house. Even when it went out of fashion, throwing it away could feel wrong, because you were not just throwing away fabric and thread, you were throwing away a piece of family history. Over time, the carpet became so common that people almost stopped noticing it. It was in the apartments of workers, engineers, teachers, doctors, soldiers, pensioners. It was in big cities and small towns, in new panel buildings and older apartment blocks, in living rooms, bedrooms, hallways, and sometimes even offices. It also appeared in public and semi-public spaces, hotels, cultural centers, sanatoriums, administrative offices. There, the carpet created not so much coziness as a sense of seriousness and respectability. It made a room feel richer, warmer, more official. In Soviet films and television programs, carpets often appeared in the background without any special meaning. They were there because they were really there. A Soviet room without a carpet could look unfinished. A room with one felt immediately familiar. By the 1970s and 1980s, the carpet had become a full part of Soviet visual culture. It belonged to the same world as glass front cabinets, lace curtains, polished furniture, crystal bowls, wall clocks, and the television set in the corner. Then the world changed. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the carpet began to lose its status. In the 1990s and 2000s, many people removed carpets from their walls. They renovated apartments, replaced wallpaper, installed laminate flooring, bought new furniture, and tried to leave the old look behind. The wall carpet began to feel outdated. It no longer suggested prosperity. Instead, it started to suggest old-fashioned taste, poverty, provincial life, or a grandmother's apartment. Then came the jokes. Photos against a carpet became their own internet genre. The Soviet carpet turned into a meme. It became a symbol of awkward family pictures, post-Soviet interiors, and a kind of visual embarrassment. People laughed at it because it was everywhere and because almost everyone recognized it. But the laughter was never only cruel. It also carried recognition. Almost everyone had seen that carpet somewhere, at home, at a grandmother's apartment, at a relative's place, at a neighbor's, at a dacha. Even when people mocked it, they were often mocking a part of their own memory. And over time, the attitude softened. What recently looked outdated began to look retro. Old Soviet carpets started appearing again in interiors, photo studios, cafes, music videos, and themed shoots. People began searching for them at flea markets and online. Younger generations who did not necessarily grow up in classic Soviet apartments began to see something different in them, not just old-fashioned taste, but a powerful visual identity. The Soviet carpet turned out to have character. It has weight, color, pattern, scale, age. It does not disappear into a room the way a neutral modern rug might. It immediately says there was a life here before you. There is memory here. There is history in this object. And perhaps that is why it has started to return, not as a mandatory part of every home, the way it once was, but as an object with mood, a piece of visual memory, a way to make a space feel less sterile and more human. But the real value of the Soviet carpet is even deeper than nostalgia. The carpet shows how people try to make space their own. A Soviet apartment was often standardized. The building was standardized. The layout was standardized. The furniture was often similar. Even the dream of a good apartment was shared. A wall unit, a sofa, a television, a carpet, a dinner set, bookshelves. But within all that sameness, people still tried to create something personal. They chose a pattern. They cared for the object. They arranged the furniture. They invited guests. They photographed their children. They cleaned the carpet in the snow. They argued about where to hang it. They lived around it. The carpet was a way of saying, this is not just another unit in a concrete apartment block. This is our home. And that is the real story. It's not simply that Soviet people had a strange habit of hanging carpets on walls. It's not just about taste. It's about how one object helped make a cold wall warmer, a noisy room softer, a standard apartment more personal, and ordinary life a little more beautiful. That is why the Soviet carpet cannot be understood only as interior decoration. It was part of a shortage economy, a part of mass housing, part of a decorative art, part of a family ritual, and part of the visual memory of several generations. It carried many things at once. Traditional ornament, factory production, the Soviet dream of stability, domestic labor, childhood memories, and post-Soviet irony. And if you look at an old Soviet carpet today, it no longer seems like just a funny background from the past. It starts to look like a record of an entire era. An era when getting a separate apartment could feel like a victory, when a good household item was bought for decades, when comfort was created not by designers, but by families themselves, when identical rooms were slowly turned into personal homes, when a carpet on the wall was not a mistake in taste, but a simple human desire to make home warmer, quieter, and more beautiful. And maybe that is why it still makes people feel something. Not because everyone wants to return to Soviet life, but because behind that carpet, there is something very easy to understand. Home, memory, family, and that familiar pattern on the wall, which spent years in the background of ordinary life, until one day, it became a symbol of an entire time.